Manon, I can see you cross-chaining from here. When we ride in sub-optimal gear ratios, such as biggie big or smallsy smalls, people will often tell us not to do it because it's bad for our bikes.
But how bad is it? Surely it can't be that bad.
Well, in this video, we're going to take a look and find out more.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Let's go.
The most efficient drivetrains operate in a perfectly straight line, and this is particularly true for a single speed or fixie bike because these have a chain efficiency of 97%. That means that for your pedaling input at the cranks, 97% of that effort goes into turning the back wheel.
However, if the chain runs at an angle, the edges of the chain will rub against the teeth of the sprocket, and this will create more friction. Not only that, it will create more noise. And your riding buddies will love to point it out to you.
Manon, you're currently cross-chaining.
Yes, I know, Alex, it's to show the viewers. It's not only the know-it-alls on the club runs, but major group set brands will also tell you to avoid cross-chaining.
But why is that? Well, there are a few reasons, starting with
drivetrain efficiency.
In May 2019, Vela News and Ceramic Speed conducted some experiments on this using a 2x drivetrain. And they use a 3953 tooth chain set and an 1134 tooth cassette, tested at a constant riding power of 250 watts. Now this is important because as that load increases, or as the power increases, the load increases, as does the resistance, and therefore changes the efficiency too.
And the results showed that the friction loss in the 3911 was 15 watts.
Keep your hair on, Manon.
15!
It's not that much
It's
because riding in that 3911 is equivalent to riding in the 5315, and that features a far straighter chain line. But even with that straighter chain line, there are still drivetrain losses, and that's of 10 watts. And because our drivetrains are not 100% efficient, they're actually 97% efficient, it means that the overall saving in that 5315 is between 5 and 6 watts.
However, in the Biggie Big combo, it was a far less saving. In the gear 5334, it was only a watt difference to its equivalent of a 3925, which isn't much at all.
It's not that much, is it? So the results of this experiment show that if you do have to cross-chain for a short period of time, just don't stress over it.
It's not worth the stress.
And this is all well and good in the peace and serenity of a controlled lab environment, but what happens when you get out in the real world? Well, we're going to do a little experiment, and to do this, I'm going to ride in smallsy smalls, so my smallest chainring at the front and the smallest sprocket at the back. However, I can't quite ride in the smallest sprocket at the back because, as we mentioned, Shimano and other group set manufacturers want to limit your ability to do that, and as such, it's not actually possible to shift into those gears.
It's still in pretty small.
It's still in a pretty small gear though.
And I'm going to ride in Biggie Big, so in the big chainring at the front and the biggest sprocket at the back. We're just going to head out and tell you how it feels.
Perfect. I better get on my bike.
Yeah, I'm probably going to overtake you.
Oh, God.
Come on, Alex, keep up.
Yeah.
So riding along in my Biggie Bigs, and my initial thoughts are, it just doesn't feel as nice. I ride my bike quite a lot, and I know what a nice gear feels like, and this doesn't feel very nice. The chain is stretched out to its maximum it can be. So for example, if your chain was a little bit on the short side, you might do some damage to your rear derailleur trying to get into the Biggie Bigs. Another thing is, when I do go uphill and I put some pressure through the pedals, I can hear the friction, which does not sound very nice.
And I am riding in my smallsy small, not a gear I usually choose to ride in, but I am for this experiment. And the first thing that jumps out at me is that the chain is particularly loose, which means as I ride over any bumps, it's rattling around, not only banging on the frame, running the risk of chipping the paint, it also means the chain could easily jump off of the chainring or switch across some of the sprockets on the cassette. As well as that, it's particularly obvious as I start to pedal a little bit harder and try and climb up some of the gradients, you can feel that the chain just isn't running as smooth as it normally would. And that presumably follows in line along with what we've just been talking about, saying about that drivetrain efficiency and loss of power because the chain isn't running in a straight line. And we know that those losses are relatively small, but it is going to slow you down. Sure, it's not something I can particularly feel when I'm riding, that I'm losing 5 watts, but I know it's going to make me slower, and that's something I want to try and avoid. Right, that's enough of that. We found out that cross-chaining does feel particularly horrible when you're out on your bike.
Yes, can we get out of these silly gears now, please, Alex?
Yeah, we can. But one point I do need to mention quickly is that drivetrain efficiency is also impacted by the cleanliness and how well maintained your chain is. So a nice clean and correctly lubricated chain is going to be more efficient than a dirty one covered in grease.
And that brings us nicely on to our next point. Increase wear.
That additional friction generated by cross-chaining will lead to increased wear on your drivetrain components. Although this is relatively small over time, a lot of cross-chaining will add up to a significant amount of wear on those components.
This means that shiny chain and cassette of yours will grind together to wear the teeth down, meaning you're going to have to replace it sooner, costing you more money.
But once again, a clean bike is better than a dirty bike because a nice clean drivetrain, even if ridden in a cross-chain position, will outperform and outlast a filthy dirty one. So get the jet wash out, get your cleaning products out, and keep your bike nice and clean.
Just clean your bike. Yeah. We'll solve all your problems.
Oh, I love cleaning my bike. Okay, so we know that cross-chaining isn't as big a deal as what some people make it out to be. Although if you're someone that's after trying to save every watt possible, Ollie Bridgewood, or a time trialist for example, then it is something that you should pay attention to.
Electronic gearing can actually be programmed so you can't shift into the worst, most inefficient gear. This is something you can't do on mechanical gears though.
Something else that you can do is to optimise your gear ratios relative to the speed and the terrains that you'll be riding on. And this is something that time trialists do to make sure they can use the middle of the cassette as much as possible and keep that chain as efficient as it can be. To do this, they'll choose a larger size chain ring.
This is definitely going to get super nice in the bike vault.
If you upload your bike into the bike vault and you want to feature on the GCN Tech Show, then you need to make sure your bike isn't cross-chaining, like Manon over here. You need to put it in the big chainring and the small sprocket on the back, or at the very least, in the centre of the cassette to make it nice and straight line and super efficient.
Alex, I've got a question. I want to be as efficient as possible with my drivetrain. When is the best point for me to move from my big ring to my little ring?
God, I'm glad you asked, Manon, because here I've got a handy little chart that's been created by Friction Facts, and they've looked into the optimum shift points when using an 11/28 tooth cassette and a 53/39 tooth chain set. And I can confirm off this chart the optimal shift points are 39/17 and a 53/21. So basically, in principle, what they're saying is when you're in the large chainring at the front, you need to try and avoid going any further up the cassette from about the 4th sprocket from the top. And when you're in the small chainring, that's the same principle, but at the bottom of the cassette. So about the 4th sprocket from the bottom. And those are kind of the optimal shift points in those gears.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks a million.
I knew you'd like that. Something else to actually point out is that you need to make sure your gears are correctly adjusted. It's no good having sort of the gears clicking on the cassette, or even worse, have the chain rubbing on the front derailleur. Because I mean, that costs you like loads of watts.
Like 50, 60, 70 watts.
God, at least. Yeah. There are, however, a few exceptions to these rules, and breaking these rules is something we see the pros quite often do.
The pros are always breaking the rules. Yeah. Cross-chaining does actually give you access to the biggest and smallest gear without having to change overload.
And that's, those front derailleur shifts, they're quite slow, aren't they?
They are.
It's not something you want to do. And we will quite often see pros cross-chaining a little bit, particularly near the top of climbs, when it's a little bit faster to cross-chain rather than change gear on the front derailleur, especially when you crest the top and you're probably going to have to shift gear for that descent as well.
Yeah.
Something else that we see the pros do is shift into the large chainring or big chainring over particularly bumpy terrain such as cobbles. And that's because the chain is then under a little bit more tension and likely to be retained onto the bike a little bit better over that bumpy terrain.
So sort of banging on your frame.
Yeah, you don't want that. Hope you enjoyed our look at drivetrain efficiency, and let us know your thoughts on it in the comments section down below.
And whilst you're down there, if you did enjoy this video, then please give it a big thumbs up. And if you do fancy some new cycling kit or some new casual wear, head over to the GCN shop.
See you later.